starting a brand new series they called Achilles Heel, and I've been a pastor now for longer than I thought I was when I did the math this week. I was like, oh, it's longer than I thought. I've been a pastor now for over 12 years, and that's when I really first started preaching the first couple of times. 12 years ago, I was a student pastor, so I would preach every Sunday at our youth group that we had, but then I would preach probably 10 to 12 times throughout the year, just on Sunday morning to the adults. And so I've been doing public speaking for a pretty long time, and I've always fairly enjoyed it. It's never been something that has super intimidated me. I've always enjoyed it. Never been too scared to talk in front of people. But when I first started preaching 12 years ago, I remember when I would prepare my sermons. I would prepare my sermons, and I didn't show up preparing my sermons like, man, I don't know what I'm doing. I prepare my sermons, and don't judge me, but I'd be like, man, this is going to be really good. Every time I prepared one, I was always like, this is going to be the best sermon these people ever hear. I wasn't confident. I was cocky about it, okay? Very cocky about my sermons. And then I remember a couple years after I started preaching consistently, someone asked me if I wanted to be the speaker at our district's kids camp. And so I went, yeah, of course I do, because I'm really good at this preaching thing. So I said, I'll do it. And I remember, you can ask my wife, I remember telling her, I was like, man, these kids are going to love me because they're used to like older people, and I consider myself young at the time. I had a lot less gray hair at the time, and I was like, and I got tattoos, I'm the cool pastor. They're going to love me. So I remember I was so confident, I was so cocky about my sermons, and I had to prepare 8 sermons that I preached twice each one, and they were kids, so it was a little short, like 15-minute sermons, and I remember just being like, this is going to be awesome. The kids they're gonna look back and go, I remember when I gave my life to Christ. It was when that cool pastor preached the best sermons I've ever heard in my life. That's when I did it. I was so confident. Then I get up there, and I stood in front of all these kids, and there's like hundreds of kids. And immediately I realized, oh no, I don't know how to talk to kids. Like immediately. I was like, I've never talked in front of elementary school kids. I knew how to talk to middle schoolers and high schoolers, and I knew kind of how to talk to adults, but I didn't know how to talk to elementary school kids. So I started preaching, and to say that I bombed would be an understatement. It was so bad that, because I don't know if you know this, when I'm up here, I see you. So if you're nodding off, I see it, Frank. I see you guys doing that. I can see everything. So when I'm preaching, I can see the kids, and it's not that they weren't interested in what I had to say. They had absolutely zero interest in any word I said. It was so bad that kids started to turn around and look at the wall behind them. And you might say, what was on the wall? Nothing was on the wall. Nothing. There was not a single thing, but that blank wall was way more interesting than whatever I was saying to them. So my sermon that this be 15 to 20 minutes was 6 minutes long because I just cut it short and said, this is terrible, I'm bombing, I'm going to go to the back. And I went to the back, and it was so bad, I went behind the curtains, and I hid there until all the kids left. I would not come out. I was so embarrassed. And my wife was there, bless her heart. She came around the back. And normally I'm a words of affirmation guy. Normally she has like a word of affirmation to be like, hey, that was really good. And she came up and the nicest thing she could say was, well, we have some work to do. So that's when I knew that my sermon was terrible, when she said that. So from that day, something that day was revealed to me. It was my Achilles heel that was revealed to me that day. Ever since that day, I realized that I have this Achilles heel that if I'm not careful will show up and could tear me down. And then I've also learned that my Achilles heel is the same as yours. Even if I don't know you, your Achilles heel and my Achilles heel is exactly the same. The term Achilles heel comes from Greek mythology. If you don't know where it comes from, in Greek mythology, Achilles was unbeatable. His body was fully impenetrable except for one spot, his heel. The myth goes that his mom took Achilles and dipped him into this pool, this water that made him invincible. And for some reason, she held him by the heel and not like the leg. I don't know what kind of mom that is, but held like that. And then instead of just quickly turning around and doing it again, like, it's fine, that's enough. Everything but the heel. And Achilles, all he really had to do was just like wear a boot and not go to war, and he would have been fine forever. But instead, Achilles fights in the Trojan War, and a warrior named Paris launches one single arrow, and it hits Achilles in the one spot it can't, his heel, and it completely takes him out, completely destroys him, and that's where we get the term Achilles heel. So you may have heard the Greek myth, you may not have, but you've definitely heard of the term your Achilles heel. And here's what an Achilles heel is. Here's a definition. It's a vulnerability or weakness in spite of overall strength. It's a vulnerability in your life or a weakness in your life. Even though you have strength everywhere else, it's a vulnerability or a weakness. Normally, it's small. It's one little crack in our character. It's one area of weakness that if we aren't careful, it can completely take us down. If I don't get a handle on blank, it could take down my marriage. If I'm not careful with blank, it can destroy my career. If I don't keep an eye on, it can distance me from my relationship with God. It's a vulnerability or a weakness. It's one small thing that leads us down a path that if we're not careful can completely take us out, especially when it comes to our character. And I believe that all of us have the same Achilles heel. All of us have it. It shows up differently for each one of us. It reveals itself differently for you and for me and for all of us. But I believe it's all the same thing. It's what makes you jealous of other people's success to the point that you can't celebrate how well they're doing. It's what keeps you from apologizing to someone else even though you know you're wrong, or even worse, even admitting that you did something wrong in the first place. It will cause you to write someone off in your life because you just cannot let go of a grudge. It is what makes you exaggerate your accomplishments, hide your mistakes. It will cause you to act one way around one group of people and another way around another group of people. Last time. Oh, yeah, there you go. Everything for Scott. Thanks, Scott. The live stream people are probably like, thank you, going in and out the whole time. But it's the Achilles heel. And this Achilles heel we have, that all of us have, is called pride. Pride is everyone's Achilles heel. It's all of ours. And you might think, no, because I don't suffer from pride because I'm not like you, Eric. I'm not cocky. I'm not even that confident, okay? So that's, because normally when we think of pride, that's what I think of at least. I think of that person who's overly confident, that Eric who thought he preached the best sermons ever, and really they weren't even all that good. That Eric, the friend of yours that is really overly confident and really overly arrogant. Last week I wasn't here. I had a bachelor party for my friend in Austin. I was in Austin, Texas for the weekend, and don't worry, I remembered what my job was while I was away in this bachelor party, okay? But I didn't know half the guys. Half of them I knew really well. The other half I had never met really. And so we had golf planned the next day. So when I was there, I was trying to meet everybody. And I went around just saying, hey, so are you any good at golf? I asked everyone how they were at golf. And most people said one of two responses. Most of them either said, first, I'm terrible at golf. And I'm like, I'm right there with you. I am also terrible at golf. And then some people would be like, I mean, I'm fine at golf. And those people were good at golf, but they just understand what good golf looks like. But there's one guy I asked that, hey, are you any good at golf? And he said, yeah, I'm pretty good. He's like, I'm going to get a couple pars, maybe even a couple birdies. I'm going to definitely shoot under 100. I'm really good. And everyone else, I didn't know him. Everyone else I was friends with him started cracking up laughing because they've seen him play. And spoiler, he sucked at golf, okay? Because here's what I've learned. If you have to tell someone you're good at something, especially something like golf, it's because your game can't tell them. You have to tell them. That's what normally happens. When I think of pride, that's what I think of. I think of that person who's overly arrogant and cocky. That's the person I think of. But that's not what pride is. You see, pride is why failed marriages don't work. Yeah, there may be infidelity. Yeah, there may be fights or maybe many other things, but it all comes from the source of pride. Pride is why friendships end in destructive ways. Pride is why we think too highly of ourselves. Pride is also why we think too lowly of ourselves. Pride is what keeps God on the sidelines rather than the Lord of our life. Pride is the reason why some of us would say, I'm a Christian, as in I check that box, but I don't actually allow God to be my Savior and my Lord during the week. That's what pride is. That is pride. Pride is everyone's Achilles heel. And when I say pride, here's what I mean by pride. Pride is having an excessive preoccupation with your own importance. An excessive preoccupation with your own importance. For some, pride comes out as cockiness, as arrogance, always talking about ourselves, always making sure that we get what we feel like we deserve, always thinking about how to best serve ourselves. But for other people, that's not how pride comes out. For other people, pride comes out as self-deprecation, as a victim all the time, as I'm the worst. Some of us, that's pride. It's still about us. We just do it in a negative way. It's constantly thinking about ourselves. And God talks a lot about pride. In Proverbs chapter 16, verse 18, he says, pride goes before destruction. He continues in Proverbs, he mocks proud mockers and shows favor to the humble and oppressed. Obadiah 1:3 says, the pride of your heart has deceived you. James 4:6 says, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Pride is everyone's Achilles heel. Every struggle, every problem, every sin, everything that you struggle with in life, the source of it is pride. It will manifest itself differently, but the source is always pride. Here's how C.S. Lewis says it in Mere Christianity. It says, there's one vice of which no man in the world is free. A vice which everyone in the world loathes when they see it in someone else, and of which hardly any people ever imagine they are guilty of themselves. That is pride. So preparing for today, I read an article from a pastor in Indianapolis, a pastor named Aaron Brockett, and he listed the many different ways that pride reveals itself to us in our lives. And maybe when I read this, you're going to see some things that are like, oh, this is how I do this, and this is how pride shows up for me. So let me give you a list. I'm going to give you that whole list that I read. First one, the way a pride reveals itself, defensive. We get defensive. When someone challenges us or calls us out, we immediately get defensive. When Erica says, hey, can you pick up around the house? I immediately go, I always pick up around the house, Erica, why are you asking? She's like, I'm not saying you don't. I just asked you to pick up this one time. Can you also do it that time? I see some of you looking at each other right away. I saw that quick. Sometimes you get defensive. Like, no, I didn't do that. I get defensive. For some of us, that's pride. Maybe it looks like stubbornness. We're stubborn. When you refuse to apologize, you will never admit you're wrong. When you won't take blame for your part of the problem. Because here's what I've found in life. When you have a conflict with somebody else, very, very, very rarely, if maybe ever, is it 100% one person's fault. Maybe you only have 10% of it, but you still have 10% of the problem. So maybe we're too stubborn to do that. That's pride. Maybe for us, it's self-conscious. When a group picture is taken, we grab the phone, and who do we look for first? Ourselves. And we're like, oh, it's a perfect picture. It's like, well, everyone else's eyes closed. Yeah, but one person's not, and that's me. We're self-conscious. We always make sure we look good. Maybe you're overly conscious with how you are perceived, with how you look online, with your image. That's pride. And for you, it looks like you're discontent. Discontent is how pride comes out. My neighbor just bought a Tesla, and he's going to let me drive it at some point. I would love a Tesla. Instead, we have a 2015 Kia Sorento and a 2015 Honda Odyssey. One has a rear camera. Both of them cost me all my money to put gas in it, okay? That's the cars I have. I would love a Tesla one day, but it's easy for me to be like, man, these cars are worthless now because I see that Tesla. We get discontent. Or maybe we look at another marriage that's struggling. It's like, my marriage is struggling, but at least we're not that bad. So we're discontent with our marriage, so we just compare it to somebody else. Or you're discontent with your job, so you just dream about that next job. Then when you finally get that job, then you'll finally be happy. And then you eventually get that job and be like, oh no, I'm still discontent because maybe it's not a job problem. Maybe it's a me problem, or maybe it's a pride problem. Sometimes that's how it looks. Some of us, we look critical. Pride makes us think that our opinion is the only opinion. How could anyone be, insert your political party here? How could anyone be Republican? How could anybody be Democrat? How could anyone be either of those? How could anybody care about politics that much? How can anyone not care about politics enough? That's what pride does, makes us critical of everything else. And just because we're in church doesn't mean that goes away. Trust me, I have had people come up to me and give me feedback on how to improve my sermon who's never spoken in front of anyone ever. Had it happen. We've had people critique our kids ministry who don't have kids and have never served in a kids environment, but they know how to do it. And here's the best one. Frank, we get this sometimes. I've had people come up to me and say, here's how you should do worship, and they can't play a single note or sing a single tune, but they know the best way to lead worship. Sometimes we're way too critical, and that's pride. Maybe it's argumentative. Proverbs 13:10 says, pride only breeds quarrels. Somebody posts something I don't like online, we can't just scroll by it. We have to comment on it and let them know how wrong they are. We have to do this. Instead of, I'm going to have to waste all my time and all my energy on a screen that's going to result in nothing. Maybe that's us. Someone at your family meal says something you don't like, you can't just let it slip. You have to argue that. So we're argumentative. Some of that's pride. And the last one, self-absorbed. Philippians chapter 2, verse 4 says that each of you should look not only to your own interest, but also to the interest of others. And pride hears that and goes, yeah, but if I do that, how are my interests going to be promoted? because someone has to promote my interest. Pride is constantly focused on myself. How does this affect me? If this changes, how will it cost me? If he doesn't, how will it affect me? If she doesn't, how will it affect me? You know how self-absorbed some of us are? I've been preaching a whole sermon on pride, and all you've been thinking about is the person that you think needs to hear it. And you haven't been thinking about the fact that you need to hear it. I said one thing, and everyone looked at their partner like, see, you listening? Right? That's what some of us do. In a sermon on pride, we're so self-absorbed that we can't even hear the sermon on pride without thinking of somebody else because it can't be us. We don't struggle with pride. Pride is everyone's Achilles heel. And the way pride reveals itself may be different, but all of us struggle with pride. A great example of this in Scripture, with pride revealing itself in many different ways in just one person, is found in 1 Samuel. If you have your Bibles, you can open up to 1 Samuel. We'll be in verse 15. To give you a little background on 1 Samuel. The people of Israel at this point are transitioning from a time where the judges would rule. People of Israel were God's chosen people, and judges would oversee them. People of Israel said, we want a king, just like all the other nations. So God says, fine, you want a king. You're not going to like it, but we're going to give you a king. That's what you want. So they're transitioning from this time where judges ruled to kings. And the first king that God appoints is a guy named Saul. When Samuel, who wrote the book of Samuel, is a prophet, when he appoints Saul, Saul thinks it must be a mistake. Samuel tells Saul that God has appointed him to be king of Israel, and Saul responds, no, I'm from the smallest tribe. This has to be a mistake. I can't do it. And this, to you, might sound like humility, but it's actually false humility here. See, humility would say, wow, I don't think I deserve it. I can't believe God would pick me, but if he did, I'm going to leverage it to help other people. False humility says, no, God made a mistake by picking me. That's false humility, and that's what Saul is doing. Saul had so much insecurity and false humility that when his inauguration happens, they're about to make him king. When that happens, he's hiding in the baggage because he didn't want to be out there. He was so afraid of it. That's how Saul starts his reign as king. We skip ahead, and Saul is now king. God gives Saul specific instructions. It says, when you attack the Amalekites, don't leave anything alive. Kill everything, kill all the livestock, kill all the cattle, don't bring any of it back. But Saul is too afraid of what the people will think, and is too insecure that they will run out or that the people will not follow him anymore, so he keeps some of the livestock. God said, kill it all. Saul says, you know what, I'm going to keep some of it for myself. He directly disobeys God. And as a result, this is what God says in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 11. I regret that I made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Samuel, God's prophet, hears this, and he's heartbroken about it. So he goes on to talk to Saul. When he gets there, he sees Saul, and Saul has now erected a statue of himself for all the nation to see. So first he's terrified to be king, and he's hiding in the luggage, and now he's making a statue of himself. His pride is completely changed. Both of them are pride, but his pride is now changed to being self-absorbed. And there he is, and in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 13, when Samuel reached him, Saul said, the Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's instruction. Hey, I attacked the Amalekites. I did what I was told to do. Verse 14, but Samuel said, what is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is the lowing of cattle that I hear? He knows what's happening. Verse 15, the soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and we totally destroyed the rest. Can you see the deflection? Can you see he's blaming somebody else for what he's supposed to do? You see the excuse that he makes? You see the half-hearted truths, or the him being defensive? Where does all this come from? Pride. But eventually Saul understands what he did. Verse 24, then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. I violated the Lord's command and your instructions. I was afraid of the men, so I gave in to them. What has Saul done? He's cared more about the opinions of everyone around him than he does the opinions of God. And when I read that, you know what I think? Me too. Saul, I get it, Saul. Because there are times I care more about the opinions of other people than of God. I care more about acceptance, about recognition, about applause, about being liked more than I care about what God thinks of me. Saul, I get it. Me too. He says, I cared more about other people. And that's what I did. But Saul isn't fully a changed man. A couple verses later, verse 30 says, I have sinned, but please honor me before the elders of my people and before Israel. Come back with me so that I may worship the Lord your God. See, he's still concerned with what other people are going to think about him. This pride, this Achilles heel, if you read the rest of Saul's story, it eventually leads him to a bad place. Eventually, King David is anointed the next king, and Saul is so jealous of it that he can't do anything. He just decides, I got to take care of King David. And eventually leads him to a point where Saul ends up committing suicide at the end of his story. Pride completely takes him down. So if pride is the problem, if pride is everyone's Achilles heel, if that's the problem, what do we do about the pride problem? The problem we all have. What's the answer here? What is the solution? The solution, and we're going to be talking about this the entire rest of this series, the solution to the pride problem is humility. That's the solution. And just like a lot of us think of pride as that cocky, arrogant person, sometimes we see the word humility and we think of that self-deprecating person who constantly tears themselves down and constantly doesn't value themselves enough. Listen, that's not humility either. James says that we should humble ourselves before the Lord, and when we humble ourselves before the Lord will lift us up. And if we lift ourselves up, the Lord's going to humble us. That's what James says. C.S. Lewis has the best definition of humility that I've ever seen. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking of yourself less. That's what humility is. It's not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. You want to answer the pride problem? Walk in humility. That's the solution. And you may think, well, how in the world do you walk in humility? How would we do that? See, God knew that we wouldn't know how. So because of that, he gave us his son Jesus to give us the perfect example of what humility looks like. And in Philippians chapter 2, one of my favorite passages in the Bible, it literally talks about imitating Christ's humility. Here's what Philippians chapter 2, verse 1 says. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and one in mind. Here's my favorite verse. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. And Paul just starts to describe his mindset. Who being very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus is Lord to the glory of God the Father. That's humility. That's the humility that Jesus modeled. Imagine if that's how we lived. Imagine instead of being more concerned about speaking our opinions, we were more concerned about hearing someone else's opinion. Imagine if instead of being more concerned with how it affects us, we were more concerned with how it affects other people. Imagine if instead of being concerned about what we can get out of it, we are more concerned about what we can give into it. That's humility. The solution to your Achilles heel, it's not more. It's not more work. It's not more religion. It's not more effort. It's not more of you at all. It's less. Less of you. Because when we make ourselves less, it creates more room and more space for God to show up. When we make ourselves less, more space for him. That's humility. Walk humbly in life, following Jesus' example and putting people's needs over ours every time. Humility is not self-deprecating. Humility is not putting yourself down. Humility is being confident in the gifts God has given you and who God made you to be, and living out that mission with the talents that he's given you, with the skills he's given you, with the passions he's given you, being confident in what God has given you, living out that mission, not so that you can have the benefit, but so other people can be benefited. So you can benefit other people. That's what humility is. So this entire series, I highly encourage you to make sure you stick around for the rest of the series. We're going to talk a lot about pride and humility. Next, we're going to talk about the 3 lies that pride often gives us. But I thought there was no better way to start a series on the problem of pride, the problem that we all have, than by reflecting on the humility that Christ showed us by taking communion together. I think it's the best way that we can reflect on the fact that God, who is holy, saw us imperfect, unholy sinners and said, I don't like that divide. So I'm going to send my son to pay the price that they could never pay, that they don't deserve to get paid, but he's going to pay it for them, sacrifice all of his rights so that we can be saved. That is what humility looks like, and that's the model we should live. So when we take communion together, not only are we reflecting the grace that God has given us, but we are reflecting the fact that God calls us to join in his death. Not in his death literally, but in his death to us. Just like Christ died for us, we are called to die to ourselves so that we can have less of us, more of him, to walk in humility. So as we get ready to take communion together, if you are here and this is your first or second time, or you don't consider this your church home, you're just kind of checking things out, you are still invited to take communion with us. You don't have to be an owner of this church to take communion here. We just ask that you be a follower of Jesus. And if that's you, then you are invited to do that. If you aren't a follower of Jesus, but you want to become one, this is your opportunity to do that. So I encourage you as well to do that. What we're going to do, I'm going to ask the worship team to start heading on up. And I'm going to ask all of you to go to the sides, around the back. The host team is ready for you. You can come back through the middle. And just keep your elements with you. We will take them together after the song is over. So do not take them yet. But as you sit here and as the worship team plays this closing song after you get your elements, I want you to think about pride. What is the pride in your life that you need to work on? How does it reveal itself in your life? Because we all have it. How does it reveal itself in your life? And how can we start to walk in humility? So as we get our elements, we think about that. I ask you that you take this opportunity to walk in the humility of Christ. Let's do it. Let's take the communion together.